Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
I made a decision not to go in their direction. That was a very hard choice, to not become kind of a political operative. That path had been opened up to me. There were a lot of ambitious people going down that path. It would have been a path to a certain amount of glory. I actually was thinking about working in Bill Clinton's first congressional campaign in Arkansas. I think he would have allowed me to work with him. I was pretty good at what I did. But I said, no, this isn't for me. This is like twisting my personality. It's too much ambition. It's what one of the Watergate staff people called it blind ambition. It was like I was brought up to be ambitious, but not this kind of ambitiousness. It made me feel physically ill sometimes. So I had to pull back and start again. So I had a career path, and I had to start again because it was wrong for me. And because of my parents' experience, I knew that if it didn't feel right, you had to say no. Because you don't want to be an unhappy camper, both for yourself and then for your family in the future.
Right.
So that was one big change. Another one was I then got a job working as an assistant dean of students at Pitzer College in California. And they let me teach a class each semester. And that's when I realized, nope, I really can't be an academic. I have to try something else, because that wasn't working either. And they wanted me to stay and work in the admissions office. And I'm sure they would have treated me right. I became an assistant to the president. They treated me very well. And no complaints there, but I was like a fish out of water. Again, I had to make a big change. So none of this was a straight line, but that trying to find something that had both a contribution to the world and satisfaction, marrying those two, that was the challenge. That took me years and years and years. I feel very fortunate that I never gave up on that, of making the two happen, that I wasn't satisfied until the two came together. And if anything we're saying can help people do the same, that would be a blessing.
Absolutely.
Because it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you said it. I think you said something that is very similar to what I was feeling at different times, which is, something I wanted to do. Hey, I decided, well, I got to toss it up in the air, and I got to actually now do it. Actually committing to go in a different path than where you were before is hard. But I'm living proof that you could do this even at an advanced age. You can still turn in a direction that's more satisfying, and hopefully, if it's more satisfying, I think the contribution is going to be better too.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm in advanced stage too. I'm behind you, but I'm not far behind you. So,
well, it's very satisfying to make the contribution.
Yeah. Can I ask you a few questions?
Sure, please.
Okay. So, growing up in Jersey, what was your favorite thing about growing up there?
I'd say two things: being on a farm, and my good friend Michael Wolf, who grew up on a farm a couple of miles away. And another friend too, Frank Riesenberger. We did a lot of stuff together. We played. I got to tell you one thing about Vineland. we were very big baseball fans and,
Mhm.
and little kids. I was there till I was 10 years old, playing baseball. Vineland is a crazy, crazy baseball town.
Mhm.
Little League baseball is played at night under the lights, broadcast live on radio.
Wow.
Little
They're
League.
serious about this.
They had a little stadium. It was always packed.
Yeah.
Behind home plate, there was a net. On the first floor in the back was a hot dog stand. On the second floor was the broadcast booth. So this is what you grew up striving for. Could you make, they actually had the major leagues and the minor leagues. Could you
Mhm.
make it from the minors to the majors? This was like a goal in life. So the farm gave you lots of space and fields, you could play ball. And there was something very comforting about that, and that I really missed when we moved to the suburbs.
Mhm. So did you play ball? Did you play Little League ball?
I did.
What
I
position did
did.
you
I
play?
actually, wherever they put me, I was left-handed, so that was a problem.
Yeah.
But I made the majors one year, but they had no. This place it's so cutthroat. They had no rule that you had to play.
Hmm.
I got up 3 times the entire year
Wow.
and never played the field. I sat on
Wow.
the bench the whole time, but I was so proud. I had a uniform.
Mm-hmm.
The next year they said, you better play in the minors. So I was kind of a star in the minors because I was pretty, a little chubby kid, but I could hit the ball.
Yeah.
Uh,
But you made it to the majors. You were up 3 times.
I did make it. Oh God, I was obnoxiously proud of that.
Yeah.
I got my uniform. I ran it for my friends and showed it to them and all.
How cool.
But it was exciting.
It was a highlight.
It was baseball crazy town. Yeah. It was
So
baseball
growing
crazy
up,
town.
who was the most influential person to you?
My sister. She was like a second mother, 8 years older.
Yeah.
Funny, friendly, talented. She was my guide. She was
Mhm.
the one who I was very proud of her because everybody knew who she was, and therefore everybody knew who I was as we went through school in a small town. She was already into journalism. When she was in high school, she wrote a gossip column in the local newspaper, not the high school newspaper, the Vineland Times Journal, the actual newspaper that everybody read. She had a little gossip column. And then she went on to Rutgers University Douglas College. She was the editor of the newspaper there. And then she went to work as a journalist. But all along the way, I'd say until I was in college, she was the most influential person in my life.
In high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Probably history. I did. It was the nostalgia of history. I was like imagining times where things weren't as tough in my mind. So I kind of like modern American history. I like from like the 1880s on. That period seemed to be most interesting to me. But I was sort of alienated from subject matter. I was too worried about, maintaining perfect grades for college.
Mhm. So you decide to go to Oberlin College for undergrad. What was your major, and why did you choose to go to Oberlin?
I chose Oberlin because my sister said it was a good place, and she
There you
knew
go.
people there.
The leader told you it was a good place.
The leader, yeah. It also had a strong. I was sort of musical. I was in choirs and sang and whatnot, and it had a strong musical component. And I think I chose well. I mean, I really liked it. I loved the kids. The fellow students were spectacular, and they became lifelong friends. And I still meet people from Oberlin and feel connected to them. I became a government major. Why? Because it was the easiest major to amass the credits, because they gave you credit for history and for other subjects. So it was the simplest path, because after I worked really hard my first 2 years, because I felt like, if I didn't, I would flunk out. And I worked like 8 hours a day, every single day, including Saturday and Sunday. And after about a year and a half, and I went to summer school There was a summer program they had in France, and I went to that too, which, they paid for it. So I worked like all year round. And by the beginning of my junior year, I realized this wasn't really for me. So I started taking the easiest classes for me, like art and dance and photography and drama and things like that. I just wanted to get done.
Mhm.
Also, but they're also hanging over us was the war and the draft, and it was
Yeah.
like you couldn't just. What I should have done is taken a year off and just work for a while, kind of settle down a little bit and then come back. But that you couldn't do that. Matter of fact, my roommate tried that, and he actually got drafted and was in the Army for 2 years, and then came back.
Mm.
So it was a kind of a very pressured period,
Yeah.
especially for boys of draft age,
Mhm.
because the deferments kept changing, kept getting harder and harder. Finally, I won the lottery, quote unquote. I got a very high number, so I wasn't going to ever get drafted, but I was already done with school by the time that happened. Yeah, so I was a government major. And then when I went to grad school, really it was, I chose Princeton, the a 2-year master program instead of law school. That was my choices. I thought the credential would be better from Princeton, but also it gave me a chance to catch up for all the liberal arts classes I didn't take. I became a basically advanced bachelor's degree.
Mhm.
I took classes that I never took. I took more economics classes. I took statistics classes. I took the things I should have taken when I was an undergraduate,
Mhm.
to become a little bit more well-rounded, and also to be able to become a translator. I need to know a little bit more what academics actually did, and it was a
What
good
was your
place for that. They were
master's
very
in?
it was called public affairs,
Okay.
with an emphasis on urban and domestic public affairs.
Okay.
They had like four. It was all the same master's degree, but they had basically they're training people. It was a very interesting program. It was funded by somebody, nobody knows who. The thought was it was the CIA. It was free tuition, and they gave you a stipend every month.
Hmm.
So I didn't have to go into debt. I had some debt from undergraduate, but I didn't have any debt from graduate school.
Wow.
And they're basically training people to become upper level public servants.
Yeah.
That's where you're supposed to go. People went into various government agencies. They come in at not a super high level, but a reasonably high level, and then the idea was to work your way up. And they actually had a what's called a mid-career program where they brought in government people for a year just to mix things up with us. But that was really kind of funny. So people from CIA, Department of Defense, were all students with us. But it was kind of interesting because they weren't really academics. Most of the kids that were grad students were very strong academics, but the mid-careerists weren't. So it was an interesting mix. It was kind of fun to do projects with them. It was like I was kind of used to it because I'd already been working in political campaigns. So it was like interesting to watch the interactions. But it was a very good program. Classes were strong, and I met another professor there who was an Oberlin grad, and named Sheldon Wolin, who's now passed away, who was a brilliant political theorist. And he was in the politics department. But when you were in this grad school, you could take classes anywhere at Princeton, any graduate class you wanted, virtually. So, I took a bunch of classes from him, and that was a precious experience. I mean, I was really like, wow, this is really what academia could be about. I knew I couldn't go in that direction, but it was nice to be close to it for a while.
So you made the decision to do these interviews and tape them. And what was the gentleman's name that you interviewed?
Tony Mazzocchi.
Mazzocchi. Okay.
Mazzocchi.
So why Tony? And why did it compel you to get his life story on tape?
That's a great question. He was a very special person. He's probably the person most responsible for the creation and passage of the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, OSHA.
Oh, OSHA. Okay.
He more or less founded the modern occupational health and safety movement.
Wow.
He became, he was a kind of a shining light. He actually gave Ralph Nader his start. He gave him an office to work out of in the 1960s. And he kind of became a Pied Piper of people working on occupational health and safety. A whole generation of young, like 1960s, 70s doctors and health professionals gravitated towards him. And he found them, he gave them tasks and jobs and internships and working with different oil and chemical factories around the country.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a movement growing. There's a series of books by Paul Brodeur. One of them is called, one of them was really about, it was about asbestos, and it featured Miyazaki, was all over it,
Mm-hmm.
as the person who was uncovering this asbestos killing all these workers.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was kind of a superstar during this period. Then he tried to become president of his union, and twice narrowly missed by like 1% of the vote. And he was very radical. The other side of the union actually was tied in with the CIA, because oil workers internationally were very important, right? Who controlled oil internationally, whether it was going to be communist unions or American-friendly unions.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted control over the oil workers. And a former CIA agent actually beat Miyazaki in the election, and there were dirty deals and all this. So he didn't make it twice. And he had this whole vision for a much more, I don't know if you have been following Sean Fain of the United Auto Workers.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a very pro-working class. That Miyazaki was very much like him.
Okay.
Very outspoken, very direct, very credible.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke that kind of language. But he failed. He failed, and because he was too honest. He
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't make a deal at the very end. He couldn't make the deal that would have given him the election. It was like, in retrospect, I wanted to kill him just for that, because he would have been a great union president. Anyway, what happened was he moved back to New Jersey. He was in Washington and became, in Denver, actually. That's where the headquarters of the union was. He was vice president, he was secretary, et cetera. Came back and worked at, we gave him an office at the Labor Institute where I was working. And we set up a little institute for him called the Public Health Institute. And he and I started collaborating. And for the next 20 years, I was sort of his, enabler.
Mm-hmm.
He'd have the ideas, and I would try to help make them happen. And we did all kinds of, crazy stuff. And, he tried to form a labor party, a political party. So he tried a lot of stuff. And I don't know what your listeners think about Donald Trump, but Miyazaki in 1990s predicted that a Donald Trump would come along and capture the imagination of the working class, or a lot of it, because he saw that people were getting disgusted by the two parties as they were, and that their jobs were constantly in danger. NAFTA, this, that, and the other, they kept losing their jobs, and they weren't being able to produce a decent life for their children, and that they were going to turn towards somebody who was promising them different from what the establishment was promising them. He saw it coming, and he was trying to, wake people up to it, and nobody was listening. But anyway, he had this great, colorful career. Also, he was very down to earth, good cook. He lived upstairs in my house for a while. He went through a divorce, and he ended up living in our house. And he, cooked for us a lot, et cetera. He was, very. He's both charismatic, but also people like to be around him.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he had a history
Mm-hmm.
that was worth telling. He was interesting. He also could not write. He really was. He was an incredible reader.
Mm-hmm.
He had been through World War II. He was an incredible reader, and had a scientific mind. I mean, that's what I interviewed Ralph Nader for the book, and he told me, I said, what do you find most outstanding about Tony. He said his ability to attract science students, medical students, was second to none. And that's because he really had a scientific mind. So he read like crazy. He couldn't write a lick. So I was kind of his writer already.
Yeah.
But I was kind of his person. I wasn't really my person that much. I was more his enabler. And so when he passed away, two things happened at the same time. One, he really did have a story to tell, and he didn't write anything. So, how were you ever going to learn it? You could find fragments in various articles and in Paul Brodor's book, et cetera. But, no one would go do that. There was nothing really written about him. And he didn't write. So it was a wide open field. And second of all, it gave me a chance to be my own person while I was still enabling him. Now I was doing something else. And I think that's where the explosion of satisfaction came in. I was now, I hate to say it, the guy died, right? But he gave me a gift. The gift was to write.
Well, but I think there's more to this. You were helping to complete his legacy, pass his legacy on, right?
Correct.
And you were making an impact because you had somebody that you believed made an impact when he was here, and you wanted him to continue to make that impact. That's one of those. I'm trying to think of the word, but it's almost like this is a mission that's bigger than you. And
oh yeah, no,
it had to be one of those things that just absolutely juiced you, right? It had to be one of those things that you just going through that process and doing that had to have been cathartic. It had to have been inspirational. It had to have been energizing. I can't even imagine how cool that must have been. So let's do this. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So let's do this. Let's talk about. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please.
Well, I want to talk about your book, War on Workers. Can we shift gears? Okay. Go ahead. What do you want to say?
There's a story on that. Wall Street's War on Workers actually grew out of, again, a personal experience at Oberlin College.
Yeah.
After Oberlin College, in the middle of the pandemic, the college decided to lay off replace 114 workers with contractors, full-time workers who had union contracts, got rid of them and brought in non-union contractors. And a bunch of us tried, alumni got together. I hadn't, my son went to Oberlin, actually. I hadn't really done anything there. I hadn't been there often, except for him. All of a sudden, I'm involved with this crew, and turns out a lot of people were upset about this, and we tried to turn that decision around. We failed, but we raised like $3,000 for every laid off worker. We raised a lot of money to help these people move on. We also, 4 students became our interns, and they interviewed these workers. And when I read the transcripts, I was shocked at how brokenhearted they were, about how betrayed they felt, how upset they were, like physically, not just financially, but like emotionally. This one woman couldn't drive through the town anymore. This other woman woke up every morning throwing up because she felt so upset about what happened. I thought, what the heck? Is this going on all over the country or what? So that got me looking into the issue of mass layoffs. And I realized, oh my God, this is a huge problem that we're not talking about. Number one. Number two, its fundamental cause is this whole shifting of power to Wall Street and finance. And these layoffs are actually designed to produce what are called stock buybacks, not at Oberlin, but in the private sector, to enrich Wall Street investors. And on top of it all, it was alienating working people from progressives, places like Oberlin, and from the Democratic Party. And I realized, and then as I was researching it, people say, well, working people have just become more, deplorable, right? Racist, sexist, et cetera, et cetera. So I dug into that with my research team. And it turns out that working people become more liberal on all those issues. Immigration, gay rights, all this, they become more liberal in the last 20 years. But what they're angry about is being layoffs that nobody does anything about, especially the party that they've identified, which is the Democrats. So that gave me a story. And in this book, it was a lot of the kind of number crunching to back up the story that was really new and different. I'm not the first person to notice this transformation of working people away from the Democrats, but I probably was one of the only people that could actually pinpoint why it happened and when it happened. For example, this was one thing that was kind of an exciting discovery. There's a little county in West Virginia, and it's a county where in the early in like early 1900s, the county was the center of the coal wars. Mother Jones spoke there. The United Mine Workers were organizing. There was literally a war. There were thousands of guns in the hands of miners and in the hands of the Pinkertons that were supporting the owners, and they were battling it out. Eventually, state troops and federal troops came in, put down the rebellion. This was all over, very basic living conditions and working conditions in the mines. Well, when the Roosevelt administration came in the 1930s, it lifted the ban, supported the Union, and this county was unbelievably loyal to the Democrats. Well, that story changed. Let me just make sure I don't blow the numbers here. They went from incredible support of the Democrats. This one county went from Bill Clinton got almost 70% of the Democratic vote in that county.
Mhm.
Joe Biden got 13.5% in that county. That's how far they had gone.
Wow.
So, and the county's virtually all white. So what happened in that county? Well, it turned out that county lost the most coal jobs of any county in the whole country. It went from 3,300, only had 25,000 people. It
Mhm.
went from 3,300 coal jobs to 300
Wow.
during this period of decline of the Democratic vote. And this is the real killer. So what did the Democrats do for this county, right? You'd think they would try to help in the transition away from coal mining, reclamation, you could think of all the things, new internet, schools, you could think of public, build like they did in the 30s, rebuild the highways, et cetera. Didn't do anything. What happened was the private sector came in, and you can't make this up. What happened was a former felon came into town and bought up a drugstore and started selling opioid prescriptions. And he got a doctor to sign them. And then another entrepreneur came in and set up a rival store, and they put out a prescription a minute. And that county became the opioid capital of the entire country. People were lining up in cars from the 5-state area. It became the economic engine of this county.
Wow.
And they sold more drugs there than the biggest drugstores in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, et cetera.
Wow.
That became the economic development program. So this is a big story.
Mhm.
The abandonment of the working class is a big story. And since I work with working people educationally all the time, this story was near and dear to my heart. It was, I was shocked by what I found. This is not what I expected when I started the story. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I mean, there've been some some people have done some very, very good research and writing on these, on case studies of different counties and different places where this happened. But nobody had put it all together and said, hey, this is not just a one-off affair. This is like a big deal. This is like happening all over the place. And, look no further, Mingo County, West Virginia is, one little county. But we then found, and this was the other part that was absolutely mind-blowing, the what they call the blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, that have been traditionally Democratic and that turned to Trump not once, but now twice. We looked at every single county in those 3 states, like 170 counties, I think it adds up to. And we found the mass layoff rate. And we're only counting layoffs of 50 or more people at one time, because there was a database that used to exist in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We found that the counties that had the highest mass layoff rate had the biggest drop in Democratic vote. And we statistically were able to see if there was anything else that was causing it. No, this was the reason it was going down. Anyway, we had a tiger by the tail. And it's now leading me to my next mission in life, which is I think there's an answer to this problem. And I was trying to get the candidates to hear me during the election, but they seem to be too busy. I'm too small a fish. But I've been doing some, we commissioned a survey, and we found that working class people want the following. Would they agree with the following principle? Corporations who receive government money, taxpayer money, should not conduct involuntary layoffs. Taxpayers should not be laid off if they're funding a corporation. And the layoff should be voluntary, based on buyout packages. No one should be forced to leave. That has an incredible amount of support across the board. Second position we were testing, and we're still testing, is a state ballot initiative. Would you support the following? That any corporation that gets public money should not conduct involuntary layoffs. All layoffs should be voluntary. No one should be forced to leave. Overwhelming support. So my mission in life is to get the political entities out there to put this on their platform. It's not there. It's not there. The mass layoffs is not even on the most radical platform that Bernie Sanders puts out. Just not there. It's like layoffs have just been accepted as a fact of life, something we all have to go through. There have been 130 million of them since 1993. Wow. 130 million. Half the people of Pennsylvania, half the working class of Pennsylvania has gone through a layoff at least once, and many of them more than once. It's just accepted. You can't do anything about it. It's an act of God. It's just, technology or whatever. We just have absorbed this. So I'm trying to break through and just say, no, we can do something about it. We may not succeed in doing something about it, but at least should be on the agenda for discussion. So you heard it first. This is my first public announcement.
So is this the next book?
Let me tell you the steps, and then we'll see if the book comes out of it. The next step is I'm going to work with this group who are more academically inclined, and we're going to hire a big polling company, one of the top polling companies, to really investigate this more thoroughly with lots of different kinds of questions. I've got to raise the money for this, et cetera. And if that continues to show what I'm going to show, then I think the book will be about not just the proposal, but kind of the rite of passage of the travels with Charlie, the travels of what it's been like to try to talk to other people about this, and what their reactions have been. And then, the end of it is, do I succeed or not? Right? Does it make an impact, or is the brick wall solid? And I'm talking not just about conservative people. I found that born again Christians support this proposal 3-1. That people who go to church every week support this proposal 3-1. There's virtually no opposition to it, but the what do you call it? The gatekeepers, right? Conversations are, and people like you are trying to break through the gatekeepers, right? You come here, let new information out. But the major news media, the major political groups, the both right and left, they're gatekeepers, and they get to decide what's legitimate for discussion and what isn't. And it'd be interesting to see if we can break through. So yeah, maybe there's a book there. I
So
certainly
we heard it here first.
It's dragging me along. That's the interesting thing. I tell my friends, I go, how do I know if the project's good? Do I wake up in the morning feeling nauseous about it, or do I wake up wanting to get up and work on it?
Yeah.
That's the key. And right now, I'm like thinking ahead. I got an interview tomorrow with somebody that's very important about this. A guy just called me just before we got on with you today about this. I feel like things are clicking, and I'm feel positively engaged. I wouldn't say I'm totally in love with it yet. That takes a little, after we do this next big poll, ask me then. If that clicks in the way this little pre-survey did, then I think we're ready. We're cooking with gas.
Well, let's have you back on to promote.
And yes,
that.
You heard it first.
Let's have you back on to promote that book. Okay.
That'd be great. And I'd like to promote what you're doing too. This is a real gift to people. Not necessarily my story, but the collection of these stories has got to be good for people.
Yeah. Thank you, Les. And thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been awesome.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.